Flatten your hair.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me here to speak tonight. I was here about 2 or 3 months ago, right after I was officially assigned here. We've lived here about 4.5 years, but I was officially signed here last fall. And so I was trying to make a rounds of some of the groups and organizations to get to know people. But I thank you for inviting me here tonight. One of the things that I have been asked more often than anything in the last year, and as soon as I find out, somebody finds out I'm a Catholic, or especially if I'm a deacon, one of the questions they ask me is, well, what do you think of the new Pope? And I don't know, has everybody else experienced that? Yeah, what do you think of the new Pope? Well, he gets a lot of press. And in November, on the Feast of Christ the King, he issued his first complete full writing that was entirely his own. He had issued one letter earlier that he had co-authored with Pope Benedict XVI. But on the 24th of November, which happened to be the Feast of Christ the King, he issued his first apostolic exhortation, the first official writing that he had done entirely on his own. And it got a lot of attention in the press, and both good and bad. And I think that I had several people ask me what I thought of that. And I had to profess ignorance because I hadn't read it. Now, I had read some of the articles about the letter. But I'm very cautious when I hear what somebody else has to say about what somebody said. And so after about the third time I was asked that question, I decided, what should I do? Well, I should read it myself. And that's really what I'm here to recommend tonight, is that if you have the opportunity to read it for yourself. There has been a lot about it said in the press. Now, we all know our modern media has a very short attention span, 2 weeks at the most, and then of course they move on to something else. But this is a letter that I think will be with our Catholic faith for a long time. And I just want to make a few comments about it. I'm not going to tell you what I've said, because I'm telling you to read it yourself. I'm telling you not to listen to what somebody else says it says. But I am urging you to read it for yourself, because I think you'll find, at least I found, it was a marvelous piece of work. Now, the couple comments about that. First of all, don't sit down and try to read it like a book. Don't sit down and say, well, I think for the next couple days I'm going to read The Joy of the Gospel by Pope Francis I. It's not a political tract. It's not a social statement. It's not an economic statement. It is, for me, profoundly spiritual and profoundly theological. And it should be read in that fashion. And so it's, depending on what format you download it, it's going to be anywhere from maybe 120 pages to maybe 250 pages. The format I downloaded, the pages were very small. But if you read about 10 to 15 pages a day as part of your prayer time, and I suggest it be part of your prayer, not something that you want to do for an intellectual exercise. I suggest that you make it part of your prayer routine and read it in short sections. I think it's very well organized, and I think it's very well presented, and I think, of course, we're reading the English translation, and so I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the translators. But I think he's a very articulate and a very spiritual person. There are a couple things that I would suggest, and if Father Eric were here, I was hoping, I don't know whether he's read it or not, and I won't speak for him, of course, but just for the rest of you, one of the rays of hope in that is there's about 35 or 40 pages devoted to the homily and how to prepare one. So there's a ray of hope there for the laity. If the priests and the deacons spend any amount of time, if they don't read any other part of the letter, they ought to read those 30 or 35 pages. The homily and how to prepare one. So that's the bright ray of hope in it. Well, actually, there's a lot of hope. I say that a little bit facetiously. But he does talk about, we hear a lot these days about the new evangelization. And I'm not exactly sure what that's supposed to mean or what they're getting at when they talk about the new evangelization. But this letter is a good way of expressing that. And he talks about how not just the priests and the bishops and the deacons to evangelize, but he talks about how the entire church of the people of God is supposed to evangelize and supposed to share the joy of the gospel. And that's the name of the letter. The joy of the gospel. So again, and I think if you read that, you will understand that as lay people, the power that you hold as lay Catholics to evangelize, not just to people outside our community, but people within our community. We need to evangelize to one another, even though we are, and you especially here, are a group of solid Catholic men. But one of the pleasures I've had here since being at St. Joseph, and I know I see several of you here, is the Saturday morning men's group that meets on the second and fourth Saturday of every month. And that is a marvelous example of how Catholics evangelize to Catholics in the sharing of their faith stories and in their sharing of their perspectives of Scripture. There are a couple phrases that really stuck out for me, though, and this is again why I was so excited about his literary style. One of the things that Francis urges is that as we make contact with what we think of as the poor of our society, or the marginalized of our society, whether it's people in prison, whether it's people who have addiction problems, whether it's people that have law enforcement problems or whatever. Francis uses a phrase that he says, we have to take on the smell of the sheep. If we are to be Catholics, we have to take on the smell of the sheep, meaning that we have to touch them. We have to go out and see them. It's nice to write a check to St. Vincent de Paul or to the Salvation Army. That's all very well and good. But if you're going to live the gospel, you have to touch the poor. Remember the story of Jesus when the leper approached him and asked a healing. Jesus did something that was absolutely forbidden in his time. And the first thing he did to that leper was touch him. And that's what Pope Francis is asking us to do, is to touch the poor. A little bit later, he uses the different terminology. He says, Jesus wants us to touch human misery. He wants us to touch the suffering flesh of others. And that's what we're all called to do. So, and especially to the men here I know that work with St. Vincent de Paul and so forth, God bless you for touching the misery and suffering of the other people. Another thing he said, and then I'll close with this, I wrote a whole bunch of things that were in there, but another one that he said that struck particularly meaning for me, and this has to do with those of you who are involved in the pro-life movement. This was for me a very poignant phrase. Now when we talk about pro-life, I'm not just talking about abortion. I'm talking about the issues that we have around stem cell research, the issues that we have around capital punishment, the issues that we have around cloning and all of this biological research and the bioethics that's going with it. Pope Francis says, and made it very clear, that humans are not an end. or no, I'm sorry. He says humans are an end, not a means for solving other problems. And so when we talk about abortion, when we talk about stem cell research, when we talk about capital punishment, when we talk about all these things that degrade the human being, we make the human being a means to solving other problems. And he makes it very clear that that's not what human dignity, as those of us created in the image of God, is all about. So with that, as again, I've got a whole list of things and I won't take any more of your time, but I do appreciate the opportunity. I strongly urge you to get online and get a copy of The Joy of the Gospel and spend a few weeks praying it. I can guarantee you, I don't make very many guarantees, but I guarantee you that that will be an experience that will enrich you all spiritually. Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon Herman.